Subscribe, like, and comment, because stories like this don't just happen, they're buried, erased, and forgotten unless someone digs them back up. The sirens were already fading when the guard tower lights snapped on, washing the prison yard in harsh white beams. It was just before dawn, the hour when even the most restless facilities briefly fell quiet. But inside cell block D, something had gone terribly wrong. They found Marcus Hale slumped against the concrete wall of his cell, wrists cuffed behind him, face pressed into the cold floor. The official report would later describe it as a medical emergency during confinement. No mention of the bruising along his arms. No explanation for why his cell camera had gone dark for 11 minutes. No reason given for the bloodstained transfer log discovered hours later in a locked administrative office. Marcus Hale was 32 years old. He had been sentenced to 15 years for armed robbery, a crime that never resulted in a fatality. He was not supposed to die inside one of America's harshest prisons. But by sunrise, his name was already being quietly processed as another statistic. This is where the story should have ended. It didn't. Detective Laura Mendel stood just outside the reinforced doors, staring at the cell through a narrow window. She had investigated murders in abandoned houses, gang executions in parking lots, and crimes that left entire neighborhoods shaken. But this place unsettled her in a different way. Prisons were supposed to contain danger, not manufacture it. Mendel had been called in because Marcus Hale's death triggered a rare external review. A public defender had filed an emergency motion the night before Hale died, alleging systemic abuse and credible threats made against her client. The paperwork had been time-stamped just 43 minutes before the incident. Timing like that was never a coincidence. Hale's file painted a complicated picture. He was quiet, educated, a model inmate on paper. He worked in the library, helped other prisoners file appeals, and had recently submitted a formal grievance against multiple correctional officers. The grievance alleged retaliatory confinement, denial of medical care, and physical intimidation. It named names. Those names were now scrubbed from the digital system. When Mendel asked for the original grievance, she was told it had been misplaced. When she requested surveillance footage, she received video files with missing segments and corrupted timestamps. Every step forward felt like pushing against an invisible wall. And then there was the transfer order. 3 weeks before his death, Marcus Hale had been moved from a medium security facility to one of the most restrictive prisons in the country. No disciplinary infraction justified the transfer. No behavioral incident supported it. The order had come from a regional administrator who had never met Hale and had approved over 200 transfers that year, almost all of them involving inmates who had filed complaints. Hale had written a letter after the transfer. It was mailed to his sister, postmarked from inside the prison. It arrived 2 days after his death. "I don't think I'm supposed to make it out of here," he wrote. "They keep asking who else is talking. I don't know what they want me to say." The letter sent Mendel down a path few investigators were willing to walk. Inside the prison, officers closed ranks. Interviews were delayed. Statements were rehearsed. Everyone remembered the same thing, nothing unusual. Hale had been uncooperative. He had refused orders. He had collapsed. But when Mendel examined the facility's use of force records, she found discrepancies. Reports filed after Hale's death referenced restraints that were never logged as issued. Medical staff notes contradicted guard timelines. One nurse quietly admitted she had been told not to document certain injuries. Fear had a way of spreading faster than truth in places like this. The prison itself seemed designed to erase humanity. Endless concrete corridors, fluorescent lights that never dimmed, cells small enough to make time feel heavier. Inmates spent 23 hours a day locked inside, their contact with the outside world reduced to muffled voices through steel doors. This wasn't just punishment. It was pressure. Mendel began to understand something that reform advocates had been saying for years. Extreme confinement didn't just break prisoners. It created conditions where abuse could hide in plain sight. As the investigation widened, another name surfaced: Daniel Cross. Cross had been transferred out of the same unit 2 days before Hale's death. His transfer had been rushed, approved overnight, and routed through multiple facilities across state lines. No forwarding address. No current location listed in the system. Cross and Hale had shared a cell block. They had also co-authored a legal complaint accusing the prison of violating federal standards on confinement. Cross had signed his name first. Now he was gone. Mendel requested Cross's transfer logs. Half were missing. The rest listed times that didn't align with transportation records. Someone had taken great care to muddy the trail. Then came the anonymous email. It arrived after midnight, from an untraceable address. No greeting, no signature, just a single sentence and a file attachment. Check the basement records room. The attachment was a photograph. Grainy, poorly lit, but unmistakable. It showed a metal door beneath the prison's administrative wing, a door not listed on any official floor plan. Scrawled across it in marker were 3 numbers. D-17. Mendel knew the code. Disciplinary Unit 17. A segregation area officially decommissioned years earlier after a federal audit raised serious constitutional concerns. According to the state, D-17 didn't exist anymore. But the photo suggested otherwise. When Mendel confronted the warden, she was told the image was fake. A prank. A fabrication meant to discredit the institution. Yet his voice faltered when she asked why maintenance logs showed recent electrical work in a sealed section of the building. That night, Mendel reviewed Hale's final medical report again. Hidden beneath clinical language was a phrase that made her stop breathing. Extended exposure. No explanation. No context. Extended exposure to what? The next morning, a search warrant was approved. Narrow, limited, and heavily contested. Mendel was allowed to inspect only archival storage areas beneath the administrative wing. 2 officers escorted her down a stairwell few staff ever used. The air grew colder. The lights flickered. At the end of the corridor stood a metal door. Unlabeled. Unlocked. When they opened it, the smell hit first. Stale air, disinfectant, and something else, something human. Inside were rows of cages, restraints bolted to the floor, and a handwritten logbook resting on a steel table. The last entry was dated the night Marcus Hale died, and next to his name was a note that stopped the investigation cold. Subject refused to comply. Escalation approved. But what Mendel didn't see yet, what no one was prepared for, was who had signed off on that escalation. Because the signature at the bottom didn't belong to a guard. It belonged to someone far more powerful. And that was only the beginning. Detective Laura Mendel's heart sank when she saw the signature. Deputy Commissioner Alan Whitmore. The name was a gut punch. This wasn't just some senior official. Whitmore was the poster boy for prison reform. The media loved him. Lawmakers quoted him. He was the supposed guardian against the very abuse she was now staring at on paper. His signature was right there, authorizing an escalation in a secret unit the state swore didn't even exist. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one dead inmate, Marcus Hale. This was about an entire system protecting itself, a conspiracy of silence reaching the highest levels. The danger was palpable, and just as quickly as she understood it, the walls went up. Her access codes were revoked. Warrants weren't renewed. Her emails vanished into digital black holes, and her calls were rerouted to impassive legal departments. When she tried to question Whitmore directly, she was politely shut down. He was unavailable indefinitely, but a fire had been lit, and it was spreading. That logbook from the basement contained more than just Marcus Hale's name. There were dozens of others, identified only by their inmate numbers. The entries spanned years, each telling the same grim story. Noncompliance, escalation, extended exposure. There were no documented injuries, no disciplinary hearings. These men weren't being punished. They were being disappeared in plain sight. Mendel knew she couldn't fight this alone. She reached out to a trusted federal investigator, a veteran of civil rights cases. She laid out the photos, the copied logs. His reaction was immediate and chilling. "This isn't just a few rogue guards," he said, his voice low. "This is policy, hidden behind procedure." Together, they started pulling the threads, tracing the chain of command. A dark pattern emerged. Inmates who filed grievances, who helped others file them, or who dared to speak to outside advocates were flagged. They were then transferred, shuttled between facilities so frequently that their lawyers couldn't keep track. They were kept in a state of legal and psychological limbo, their communication cut off, their memories and spirits systematically broken. Marcus Hale wasn't a violent man. His crime was that he was articulate. He could tell a story, so they decided to erase it. As federal investigators began sniffing around, the pushback from the corrections department intensified. But then, a crack appeared in their wall of denial. A whistleblower, speaking on the condition of anonymity, contacted Mendel. She described a shadow system, something the insiders called containment management. It was an unwritten rule. a ghost policy that everyone in power understood. Inmates who threaten the narrative get buried, she explained. Not killed outright, just erased slowly, so no one can point to a single moment and call it murder. The story began to leak. First, a small, cautious piece in a regional paper. Then, a major national outlet picked it up. The floodgates opened. Lawmakers demanded answers. Advocacy groups brought forward old, dismissed complaints that now seemed terrifyingly relevant. Deputy Commissioner Whitmore, the reform champion, issued a statement. He denied everything, calling the allegations deeply misleading and blaming isolated administrative errors. But it was too late. The momentum was unstoppable. And then, Daniel Cross reappeared. Not in a prison cell. Not in any official record. He was found in a hospital, 2 states away, delirious and dehydrated. In his pocket, a crumpled piece of paper with a legal aid hotline number. A number Marcus Hale had given him months before. Cross's memory was fragmented, a nightmare of lights that never shut off, of being moved in the dead of night, of signing forms he couldn't understand. But he remembered Marcus. He kept saying if anything happened to him, people had to know. Cross whispered to the investigators. He said the system only works if silence wins. Cross's testimony was the final blow. The last barrier of denial shattered. Federal subpoenas flew. Inspectors, armed with court orders, descended on prisons previously considered untouchable. The secret basement unit was officially sealed. Files were seized. And for the first time, a phrase buried in internal memos for a decade was spoken aloud to the public: corrective isolation. 2 weeks later, Deputy Commissioner Alan Whitmore resigned, citing personal reasons. No criminal charges were ever filed against him. The official investigation concluded with carefully worded findings, systemic failures, and insufficient oversight. Compensation funds were set up. New training protocols were written. The language was sterile, bloodless, and legally safe. Marcus Hale's death certificate was quietly amended. Cause of death: complications related to confinement. His family received a settlement check and a letter expressing the state's regret. But regret couldn't answer the questions that haunted everyone close to the case. How many others never made it out? How many names were never written in a logbook? How many desperate letters were never mailed? Months passed. Laura Mindel officially closed her case file, but she knew the truth. The case wasn't finished, it was just contained. Systems don't change because of truth alone. They change when the cost of exposure becomes too high. One evening, she found herself standing before a small, makeshift memorial outside the courthouse. There were no bronze plaques, no official honors. Just a simple, handwritten sign taped to a fence. It read, Marcus Hale. He tried to tell the truth. Mindel stood there for a long time, a cold realization settling over her. The reports, the press conferences, the new policies, they were all just part of the performance. The unit was closed, yes. The policy was given a new name. The officials had moved on to other lucrative positions. But the architecture of abuse remained. The lights in those isolation cells still didn't dim. The doors still locked from the outside. And somewhere, deep inside America's labyrinth of prisons, silence was still doing its job, quietly, legally, and completely out of sight. They said the system was fixed. But 3 months later, a new grievance report landed on a public defender's desk. A different prison, a different name. But the language was hauntingly familiar. And at the bottom of the page, written in a careful, trembling hand, were the words, I don't think I'm supposed to make it out of here. This story is one of many, hidden behind concrete walls and official statements. If you want to understand what's really happening in the shadows, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.